What's going on, everybody? I'm really excited today. My whole theme of 2024 was to meet more people, interact with more people, have more connections. And I got to tell you, I met a lot of great friends. I got to interact with a lot of people. I was on more collaborations. And there was one guy, however, who I met at the National who, if you watched my national videos, you'll remember the collection. Uh, Truly one of the best collections in the world, and I'm not just saying that. It is an unbelievable collection. And so I got to talk to this individual, and then we talked again that night, and then we talked again the next day, and we've stayed in contact. And I'm like, why don't why don't you come on and why don't we talk about your collection and how it came to be? To say that I'm excited about sharing this with everybody is an understatement. So let me go ahead and bring on my good pal Dave. How you doing, Dave?
Great. Hi, Greg, and thanks for having me on. Midlife Cards has been my favorite channel,
Oh,
and so it's an honor to be here today.
oh, well, that is super sweet. I I can genuinely say that when we met at the National and you let me look at your collection, like I had some highlights at the National. I mean, I got my Ernie Banks, I got a
Oh
Walter
yeah.
Johnson. I had all these great memories. That is something I'll never forget looking through your cards, and we're going to look through several of them here in a few minutes. I wanted to talk to you kind of about when people have collected for a while, when they have these collections, some of us at times are like, man, I don't know if I'll ever have a collection like that. But what we can do from each other is we can learn from each other and we can learn how people went about things and what their strategy was. And that's one of the things that I love. And so I just wanted to kind of first ask, what is like, what was your introduction to cards? Like, when did you get your first cards and what were they?
Well, interesting. I really started my card collection in 1982,
Hmm.
and I got involved in it through a project. My dad had grown up in St. Louis and was a big St. Louis Browns fan. And in 1922, the Browns had their best year ever. And he was 13 years old at the time. And he followed the team. And actually, they finished second to the Yankees in that year in the pennant race. And they had George Sisler, who hit 420 that
Hmm.
year on their team. So he was a real fan. And to the extent that even 50 years later, he could recite the starting lineup
Hmm.
of the Browns. So I got the idea, I really wondering if there were baseball cards that were issued back in 1922. So I did a little research and found out, yes, there was a set called E120, the American Caramel, that had
Hmm.
15 cards of each player of each team. So I set out on a journey to try to find those cards as a gift for my dad. And I started going to card shops. I lived in Chicago at the time, and then card shows. Uh, I got publications in Sports Collectors Digest specifically, and I was able to, over 2 years, collect those 15 cards. And as you can see, I had them put in a frame, diamond
Hmm.
frame, with the infield and outfield and the matting, and put the cards in each position, and then the six extra or six of the pitching staff, other members of the pitching staff there. So I was able to do that and gave that to my dad for a Christmas gift, and he really loved it.
Yeah, oh, well, I can imagine you really loved it. So if you're listening at home, what I just pulled up on the screen is these cards. Are these cards in the frame that he collected, which it sounds like was sort of the genesis of your collection, which is really pretty amazing. And we're going to look more at your collection here in a little bit. But so he really loved it. and 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 then what happened? So then did you
Well,
go, well, now what am I going to get next?
yeah, well, as I was finding these cards and chasing them down, because they really weren't, they were scarce cards, but they weren't really valuable. They were like $8 a piece
Hmm.
at that time. So I found I'd run into other cards and I'd say, oh, this is kind of fun. And I kind of got hooked in the hobby.
Yeah.
So I started collecting. My first really cards that I purchased outside of that were from a card dealer, and it was the 1980 to 1975 top sets made from their vendor cases. So they were in nice condition.
Hmm.
And just to show you pricing change, my memory is I bought all those 5 sets for $130. So that's it. Prices have changed. So I started going back in further in times, collecting more tops, 60s and 50s, but pretty much only sets. And then,
So
yeah,
let me really quickly.
sure.
I don't want to interrupt, but something you just explained, I think, is part of the story for a lot of us, which is you said in 1982, after you did this collection for your dad, you then went and you said, I want to start buying more cards, and you bought 75 to 80. So
Correct.
they were basically modern cards at the time. So you
Yes.
kind of started with, I'm going to do this for my dad. Oh wait, this is really fun, and I'm going to collect some cards, but they were modern cards. So you were. I interrupted you. I'm sorry, but you
It's
said
okay.
about the sets that you were kind of doing sets at the time.
And I was doing sets. And so then went through the got down to I think 53. I didn't have all the sets from 53 to 80, but I had several of them. Uh, but then I started getting intrigued by pre-war cards.
Hmm.
So then I started buying individual cards, 33 Gaudis, T206s, T3s, T202s. I didn't have a lot of structure to my collecting. I
Hmm.
was just collecting.
So
And
what year are we at now? So now you've gotten several of the sets from 53 to 80,
great.
and you're starting to go to pre-war stuff, and how much time has transpired since 1982?
Well, it that kind of continued until 1995.
Okay.
So a good 12 years of just kind of collecting and um, enjoying it, but not having a real focus or strategy of how I should collect.
How important to you at this point in 1995 and before, so from 82 to 95, how important is condition to you? Are you just going, I just want the card, I want to check it off the checklist as I'm building it, and or is it like, no, I want ones that if there are two of them, I want the nicer one. Like, what is condition meaning to you at this point?
Condition was always important to me. Now, this was before, particularly when I started, before there was any PSA grading.
Sure.
So generally, I would say I was trying to collect cards in excellent to mint condition.
Okay. And
Yeah.
you had said at one point you had a dealer who was helping you. Where are you acquiring most of these cards? Because this is pre-eBay, this is pre-auction houses, it's catalogs and it's card shows mostly, right? And card shops.
It is. And some card shops, card shows were very important.
Hmm.
And then I had a few dealers. One of really a large dealer in Chicago was helping me a lot. And when he'd get cards in that he would fit my collection, he would call me up, and he was working out of his house actually, and saying, "Hey, come on over. I got some cards for you." So I bought a lot of cards from him.
So you're like completely all in hooked. And now a lot of us guys can totally relate to where you are right now about being all in. I mean, are you married at this point? Is your wife, what is your wife thinking? Like how is that all plan how is that all playing out when you're like, I'm gonna go back over to the guy's house and spend more money on
And
this
money, you
stuff that
know,
I really, That's all good? Like,
Yeah, it was. And yeah, I got married in 83.
okay.
So during this time, she was a part of it, but it wasn't, yeah, I'd go and spend some time, spend some money,
Yeah.
but she was fine with it. And
It was your hobby.
yeah, yeah, it was
And
my hobby and I was fine.
yeah. Okay, so you were so now we're dabbling in some pre-war stuff, and you've got all these ungraded cards at home.
Right.
And at what point, like approximately what year? Because this is about when PSA, middle '90s, early to middle '90s is when they start kind of coming on the scene. SGC's coming on the scene. At, at, do you say, yeah, this grading thing is something I want to try, or are you holding out on the grading thing at this point?
Well, I sent a few cards in to be graded, and they did. At the time, I didn't think they were very good grades because I
Hmm.
really didn't totally understand. I mean, I sent in several T206s, and basically they all came back in sixes and sevens, and I was disappointed because I said, "Hey, these are nice cards. It's only a seven."
Right.
Like I did, and so but I didn't send a lot in,
Hmm.
and it wasn't that important to me at the time. I still kind of held on to it's. It's fun to hold the card and smell the card
Oh
type of
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and to put it in an encapsulated plastic just kind of didn't seem right to me. But slowly but surely, I came around to having some of my cards graded. But at that point, very few.
Now, the other thing that's interesting is at that time there was Beckett, which was the price guide. But
Yes.
then for the grading, if a card got a 7 versus a 5 or whatever, there was still kind of just a couple of price guides. And I don't know if it sounds like if you were doing some PSA grading, did you used to get the SMR magazine, the Sport Market Report that would kind of talk about what things were selling at, or did you? How are you valuing these things and seeing, or is this when you start checking eBay? How are you determining kind of what you actually have?
I use the Beckett Price
Hmm.
Guide, the annual book that came out,
Yeah.
and that was I waited a year. Every year I'd go and pick it up at the bookstore and then check
Yeah.
out to see what cards were selling for. And that was pretty much, again, because I didn't have a lot of graded cards. That worked for me.
It's interesting. I asked Dr. Beckett when I had the honor to, interview him, and I said, why did you stop at like 48? Why was 48 the first year in the monthly? And he said, well, a lot of the cards before that didn't transact that often. So the prices didn't change that often. So it would, you would need a few transactions in order for there to be much price movement. So that's why those cards went in the once a year, the thick one, the book, and
Hmm.
then the monthly were the commonly transacted ones, and it would change monthly. And I had never really, I mean, that makes sense, but
It does.
okay, so here you are now. It's in the '90s. You got a few cards that are graded, and you have a lot of cards that are ungraded. You've got a lot of sets, but then you've also been dabbling in some pre-war singles. Now,
Right.
when you're doing the pre-war singles at this point, are there particular players that you're targeting, or is it just like, man, these are two of sixes. I just want to pick them up, or was it like, oh, this guy and this guy, and if so, who were they and why?
At that point, I really wasn't targeting anybody in particular.
Hmm.
I was just collecting and getting the cards where I could. If it was in excellent to mint condition, I'd get it. Didn't matter if it
Hmm.
was a common Hall of Famer. Uh, I didn't, as I said, I didn't have a lot of strategy or focus. I was just collecting.
Yeah, you just go over to the guy's house or the dealer, and you'd see a nice example of a cool looking card and add her to the collection.
And that's about it.
Yeah, but
That's
it
about it.
does sound like from early on, condition was a priority for
It
sure.
was.
Yeah.
It was definitely.
Now, why?
So
Why was condition a priority? Because to a lot of people at that time, it it wasn't as big of a deal. And let me also, when you answer that, is when you say condition, was it sharp or was it centered? What was the condition that you were looking for at that time?
at that time, I was only looking at corners.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd look at some, you register it, you want the picture nice
Hmm.
and no creases. I would say no creases and sharp corners. It really didn't matter if it was off center to me.
Yeah.
That just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was, and I think a lot of the hobby was in the same using the same criteria
Yeah.
at that point in time.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of what you're saying mirrors very much how my dad was collecting at the time. He was about condition when a lot of people weren't, but condition was how close did it look to when it came out of the pack? Did it
Right.
does it look very close to when it came out of the pack or not close at all? And how the card was printed and cut, that was secondary to did it look packed fresh? So then okay,
Correct.
so now what happens? So you've got a few of these and you're just kind of there's no strategy, there's no rhyme or reason. Does at some point something change?
It did. And I took a turn in 1995.
Mhm.
I was working with a company and I had a chance to buy an equity position in the
Okay.
company. And
Okay.
it was going to be it was a good opportunity. And so my most liquid assets were my baseball cards.
Okay.
So outside of a few cards, I sold them all.
Oh. Okay. So you
And
sold I wasn't expecting. First of all, let me I got to tell you, Dave, I'm having so much fun right now. I can't even tell you how much fun this is for me. This is a great story. So you sell everything outside of a few cards to
right.
get that equity position in the company. I, there's a million questions I could ask from this. What are the handful of cards that you kept?
Well, the only one that I still have
Oh
from
wow.
that was the T206 Ty Cobb Red Portrait.
Okay. And was that one graded?
Yeah, it was graded a 7.
Of course it was. And okay, so you sell them off, and
I
now business is the priority. Honey, look,
business,
remember I've been doing this fun
yeah.
thing, and look at now it's put us in this position. We've got this. So then what? Where do we go from there?
Well, it was interesting because I was the CEO of our company said I was the only person who had bought stock by selling their baseball card collection. So that was what I was known for, and it financially it worked out well, uh, but there came a time when I said, I think I want to get back into this, and
Mhm.
that was in 2010.
Okay, so you took about uh 15, yeah,
15
15 years
years.
off.
Yes,
Okay.
I did. I mean, I didn't buy any cards during that time. I still in and out of following, maybe going to a card show or so, but really it wasn't my major priority at the time. Uh,
Now, how much did it blow you away after the 15 years and you came back? How different was it?
um, it was, well, the prices were higher.
Mhm.
The shows were bigger. A
Mhm.
lot of people at there. You go to a show. The first show I actually went to was in '82, and it was the second national and held in Plymouth, Michigan,
Wow.
and it was held in the Holiday Inn Hotel, just a regular old Holiday Inn hotel. So compare that to going to not McCormick Place. I guess it was. I don't know if it was the McCormick Place or if it was just in the Rosemont. in Chicago, but just night and day difference in that.
Yeah.
More people involved. There was just a lot more interest in the hobby, and it had really grown a lot more, and a lot of interest in very high cards and
Mhm.
expensive cards that there were um, talked about a lot. So yeah, it had
S-
changed.
So it's 2010. You've got a handful of cards, including a Ty Cobb Redback and a seven, and you say, "I'm gonna pick something up." What's the first thing you pick up?
Well, what I did before actually buying anything was talk to a card dealer. It was a pretty major dealer. And I said, look, this is what happened. I'm going to get back into cards. What would you recommend? How would you recommend I start collecting cards?
Hmm.
And he said, now this is different than what a lot of people would want to do.
Hmm.
But he said, I would have a small collection of like 25 to 30 really nice cards. And he said, the reason for that, you don't want to pay a lot of money for commons and have
Hmm.
all these sets. And when people come over to look at your collection, they don't care about the commons.
Yeah.
They want to see the star cards. And it's also easier to store them.
Hmm.
And looking long range, when you what will your heirs do with the cards, it'll be much easier if it's just a
Yeah.
small number. So to me that made sense. Now everyone collects differently, and I'm not about to say this is the right way or this is the wrong way.
Sure.
There is no right or wrong way, but for me that made sense.
Yeah.
So at that point I thought, okay, I'm going to start in that direction. And to answer your question, the first cards I went after were the four 1933 Ruth Goudeys.
That's a nice choice. Those are nice choices. Now, you're probably looking at graded ones, or at this point, are you still okay with ungraded ones?
I'm only going graded at this
Okay.
point because
Ne-
well, there's too much uncertainty at this point with cards that you're going to spend
Yeah.
a significant amount of money on
Yeah.
to gamble. So
Yeah.
I figured I'll go graded.
And are you PSA only at this point, or are you now doing SGC too? Because before you were doing PSA, it sounded like.
I was doing during this time. I was only PSA.
Okay.
SGC was, I considered that a kind of really a secondary brand at that
Hmm.
point in time. It
Hmm.
just didn't have the cachet and didn't have the reputation that PSA did. So I was full into PSA.
And it's so interesting you say that because again, this whole time my dad is going to nationals and I'm, rooting him on from the sidelines. I don't, I'm in finishing college, I'm getting married. I don't have any money for cards. I still love cards, but I'm not really participating in cards. And it's what you're describing is exactly how we felt about PSA and SGC too, which was at that time it felt like a secondary brand, and it felt like no, no, no. If you're going to buy a big card, you got to buy it graded at this point, and it's got to be PSA. And so you pick up four big cards. So now your collection has taken a huge leap forward again after it
Yes.
had taken this huge leap back. And at this point, is 2010. Are you all in again, or is that just like, does that kind of scratch the itch for a minute?
I'm not all in this. I'm all in the sense that I want to continue to have a small collection of really nice cards.
Hmm.
But I'm I'm keeping going. So I would say, I would maybe get a couple cards a year.
Okay.
So what, that's all in or not, but it was consistent.
Well, with the
Uh,
kind of cards that you're picking up, a couple of these a year is it, it, it makes sense. Now, I know there was a story too along the way, and we're kind of doing a timeline here, but there was a story that you had mentioned, and I think we'd actually talked about once before too, if I'm not mistaken. Uh, where Tell me about that story, and what was the year approximately where that card presented itself to you?
So, yes, and that was very early on. It
Okay.
was night, I would say, um, 84,
Okay.
1984, and I was at this dealer's house, um, and because he'd called me over and looking at some cards, and he pulled out a card and he said, "I just got this card. I paid $7,500 for it, and it will be. You can buy it. You can have it for 10,000." And it was a T206 Hannes Wagner. Slightly rounded corners, no creases, probably would be graded a 4.
Oh boy.
And at that time, I said, "Yeah, I cannot pay that much for a piece of cardboard."
Yeah.
And quite frankly, that's more than my current entire collection is worth. So
Yeah.
there's just no way I could do that. So, and when I think about it retrospectively, you kind of kick yourself for why you didn't do it. But on the other hand, I reconcile myself with the fact that once that card started increasing in value, um, I would have sold it. And
Yeah.
I would have sold it definitely nice. So I would have never held on to it to where it was a $3 million card. That just
Right.
wouldn't have happened. So it was like, yeah, I passed on it, and yeah, it would have been nice to have it, but you know, it's the way it goes.
So yeah, I mean that's pretty incredible. So you now have been kind of for the last 10 to 15 years been picking up a couple of cards a year. Um, is there anything significant that took place in your collecting along that time, or uh, was it just that you're picking up a couple of cards? And I think I know the answer to this, but I still want to hear you answer it.
Well, I was just kind of picking up a couple of cards a year without any real strategy. And it was about 5 years ago that I decided my collection should have a vision statement.
Hmm.
That's the term I made up, but I mean a vision of, okay, what do I want the collection to be? And what is the criteria I want to use to collect from here on out? Because I felt I needed to have a focus. I needed to have some strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So my vision statement defines the criteria and that I use. My first criteria overall is that I like the card.
Mm.
And everyone says buy what you like. Well, that for me that's really true. There
Mm-hmm.
are cards in the hobby that fit my criteria, but I really don't like them. And
Mm.
so even though a lot of people do, but I don't, and it's fine for them to collect it, but for me, if I don't really like the card, like looking at it, I won't. I don't want to collect it. So that's sort of the first step criteria. The next definitions are I want to collect quality cards
Mm-hmm.
of iconic players, of key sets, with an emphasis on eye appeal, specifically centering. Because at this point in time, I really feel like centering is really important, and it just makes a difference when I look at the card. So,
Now, now,
yeah,
when did you start with this focus? Is this in 2010 when you got back in, or was it more recently that you kind of went with this perspective?
it's really recent, last about 5 years ago.
Okay.
About 5 years ago, I decided I needed to do this, and
Yeah.
it really helps in providing focus in collecting. And even if you decide to buy a card that may not meet all that criteria, at least you're critically evaluating it and saying, okay, I'm consciously doing this because okay, it doesn't meet this, but I still want the card.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's important, at least to go through that process, to
Yeah.
be able to think about it and evaluate it.
I think that, you know, for people out there listening, one of the things that I just absolutely love is I love hearing from people that have been around the hobby, but been around life. And the advice that you're giving right now is set specific criteria for what you're doing. Don't just do it. And when you do that, I think that it keeps you focused. And one of the things, I just did a video on, which is what do you want to change in this coming year? And people are like, I want to be more focused. I don't want to buy this and that and get, off track. And when you actually put your strategy down and go, what is my collecting strategy? Then it's easier to see which things do and don't make the list. Like that makes it it makes so much sense. It seems obvious, but a lot of us aren't doing it, including me.
Well, look how
So
long it took me to get to that point.
that's
I
true.
mean, it took me a long time, it just last
Sure.
5 years, to say, I really need to do this.
Now, when you buy cards, and again, I want to look at these cards with you here in just a second. And guys, if you're listening, like you're gonna want to pull over if you're in the car and see some of these because it's unbelievable what he has. But how much are you thinking about, like, because when you're talking about a certain amount of value, you're thinking about, there's certainly an investment standpoint. There's certainly is this a card that I think has upward potential? And like you said, I have to think about the people who end up with the cards someday. I don't want to leave them with a burden. Like that's that's part of probably the criteria that you're going through too, which when you say quality cards, iconic sets, important players, nice to look at, good eye appeal, I like the card. Like, is that part of why those are the criteria? Or are those the criteria, and then, oh yeah, and we also want cards that are gonna have value? Like, what's the chicken and what's the egg?
Well, I would say, if you define my interest, or my what drives me, I'm probably 75% collector, 25% investor.
Okay.
And I feel like if my cards that I buy meet the criteria that I've laid out, I don't have to worry about the investment.
Hmm.
That just doesn't, because it's I believe these cards that we're talking about, again, when they're iconic players, and like when I say iconic players, I mean like the top 10 to 15 players of all time,
Hmm.
not just Hall of Famers. These are people that, if you didn't follow baseball, you would know these names, or most
Yeah.
of them: the Root,
Yeah.
the Cobb, the Garrick, Mantle, Mays, Robinson. Even if you don't follow baseball, you've heard of those.
Right.
And to me, that's what adds the value to these cards, that they'll always have value, because there'll be a lot of Hall of Famers that will be forgotten,
Yeah.
but these guys will not be. So, long-winded answer to your question. The the investment, as long as I get the cards in this criteria, I don't worry about the investment part. And I've never purchased a card strictly for investment. I,
Hmm.
I just don't do that, because it's hard to tell what's going to happen in the future. But the best bet is, if you stick with these cards, they're the ones that are going to maintain their value. At least that's my hope.
Now, last thing I want to ask you before we start looking at your mind blowing collection is, what about, like, do you have any cards that you think about selling, or have you had times where you're like, yeah, this is a card I think I want to sell? And or are these all like forever cards? Like, and people who maybe like I have a lot of cards in my collection that I like a lot. And there's a couple that have a certain meaning to them
Hmm.
because of how I acquired them, that I would rather have that example than any example because of of the story behind it. But then I have other cards that I like, but if I could turn those three into that, I'm always open to that. So do you ever think about selling anything, or is it like I'm now an acquirer of cards that will be here permanently?
Well, I guess I'm always open to selling. And in fact, uh, during the pandemic, I did sell one of my cards. I had the Gaudi Yellow Ruth in a SGC 8.5, uh, Pop One. There's a PSA 9, and then there was the next card, and there that's SGC. PSA doesn't have an 8.5, so this is one of the top two cards, and that's a
Yeah.
very desirable card.
Yeah.
And one of the an auction house that I know the person pretty well said, and this was during the pandemic, said, "Hey, I can get X price for this," and I said, "If you can get that, I'm willing to sell it." And I did, and I used part of the money I got back to buy some other cards that fit my collection. So
Mhm.
um, I'm I'm open to it, and in fact, a couple years ago, I sold one. I sold a 63 Pete Rose rookie card in a
Mm.
PSA 8, and I sold it because I bought it because I thought I probably should have this. It's a rookie Rose, but I really didn't like it.
Mhm.
And so after a while, I said, you know what, I'm just going to sell this because it's like other people said, yeah, you should have a Rose rookie, but I really didn't like it. So, because it's such a small picture. So it was like,
Sure.
I'll use other,
Yeah.
I use the money to buy the things because given a choice, I would much rather buy a pre-war cards that for the either the T206s or more I don't know T205 or a T3, any of those older cards. I'd rather buy them than buy there's cards in the 50s that I like Aaron Rookie. I don't have the Aaron Rookie.
Mm.
Eventually I'd like to get it, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't, given a choice, I'd much rather spend my money on something older.
Mhm.
So I figure sometime maybe I'll end up with the cards in the 50s. But as of now, there's I like all my, unfortunately I really like all my cards. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like all your cards too, Dave.
well,
All
thank
right,
you.
let's take a look at these. So up on the screen, I'm going to start showing some, and it's amazing because pretty much every one of your cards is an absolutely massive card, and